Okay, so we're going to continue on step 2. This is step 2, part 2. Part 1 was getting a little long, and I thought I'd start fresh. And just to remind you where we ended up is we had built our root window, which is the main window that a program uses, and we've added one widget. And just to show you that, there it is. So now, let's come back into here, and let's make our other widgets. So the first thing I have is I have this label widget, which is my title. And now I have another label widget, which is the radius. It says radius input. So these are labels, notice. So let's come back in here to our program. So again, 3 steps. I'm going to make this label called radius label. And I'm going to say tk.label because it's the same thing as the title label. I'm going to put it in the root. And I'm going to say that the text is going to equal radius. Next, I'm going to configure this. So I'm going to say radius label.config. And I'm going to use what's called an anchor parameter. And what the anchor name parameter does is I can say, I can access a constant in the TK module called W, which is the west. So what that's going to do is if I look at my picture here, when I consulted with my client, they said they wanted the radius on the left-hand side there, kind of tight up against here, not centered. And this is the named parameter that allows us to do it. So let's pull this back up. And then remember the last thing I have to do is I have to pack it. And again, I'm going to use fill equals tk.both. So let's save this. Let's give it a run. Oh, I have to close my old version. There it is. Close you down. Give it a run. Oh, I seem to have an error. Let's take a look. Line 32. I spelled the variable for some reason. Radius label. So let's save this. Let's clear this up. Let's give it a run. And there's my radius label. Okay, what's next? Next I have to add the entry box. So the entry box is what's called an entry widget. These are called input boxes. These are your standard kind of box you see in these types of programs where I can type something in. So let's come back out here. Come back to step 2. So I'm going to say radius entry equals tk.entry. And I'm going to pass it the parameter root, because again we have to associate it with our root window, and I'm going to say that this is going to have no other named parameters. I'm going to say radius entry dot config, and there's no additional configuration I have to do, and I'm going to say radius entry dot pack. And again, I'm going to tk.fill equals tk.both. So just kind of something to point out here is, I talk about this again, construct the widget, configure the widget, pack the widget. Those are your 3 steps. I'm not going to, I ran, this line is not necessary, but I've kind of kept it in here just to kind of show that pattern that we're developing. So let's save this and let's take a look at what happens. So I'm going to pull up the terminal. Oh, I have to close my old one. I always seem to forget that. There it is. And there's my title, there's my radius, here's my text. I can type stuff in it now. Nothing happens. That's okay. Let's close that. And so what I'm going to do now is essentially I have to duplicate these 2, but I have to do it for the height label. Now, a really common error I've seen when students do this is they just simply do this. They copy this, and then they kind of enter a couple times, and they paste it, and then they save it, and then they run it. And sure enough, they get 2 boxes, but they've kind of set themselves up for a really problem later. And what that problem is they have the same variable names, and that's going to cause us some problems later on. So let's change their names. We want this to be height label, height label, height label, height entry, height entry, height entry. And I'm going to change my text to height. And I'm going to leave everything else the same, I think. Looks good? Looks good. You know, often what students do is they change the height here, and then they don't change this variable name. And sure enough, it will say height, but again, you get these weird behaviors. So we're going to save this. We're going to run it. Starting to look pretty good. There's my title. There's my radius title, entry box, height title, entry box. Remember, when we use pack, it just kind of puts them in sequence. So if you want to put something in between these two for some reason, you would just have to look at the code and you'd have to find that spot, which is right there. Okay, next we need to add the output box. So the output box is a fun one. You can play around with it a couple ways. I do recommend you go online, you look up these different widgets because there's lots of different ways you can configure them to kind of give them a nice look and feel. So I'm going to say output equals, again, tk.text. So I'm going to construct this, and I'm going to pass it a root. So a text box is the widget, which is kind of the small boxes you might see that you can type in. And I'm just going to go down here. I'm going to say output.pack. I'm going to say tk. Actually, I'm just going to leave it blank. So let's save this, and let's look what happens here. Oh, I've got to come here and do that. Look at that. I get the radius, I get this, and I get this massive text box down here I can type in and kind of do whatever I want. So this is a little too big for me. You know, all I'm going to display in here is a little information about the radius and the height and the volume of the cylinder. So I'm probably going to want to shrink this down. In fact, I am going to shrink it down. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the configure to do that. So I'm going to say output.config, and I'm going to use a couple things. The first thing I can do is I can use the width. So the name parameter width, 50, will say that it is going to have a width of 50 character spaces. So that means if I set the width to 50, I'm going to have 50 characters that I could do across the page. Remember, the character size is based on the font size. So if you have a big font size, those are going to be big spaces. Next one I'm going to do is height, and I'm going to say height is 10. That's going to say that it was 10 lines of text. I don't want the person to be able to type in the box. Actually, let's just go with this now. Let's run it. Save it. Give it a whirl. And that looks like a little bit of a nicer box. But notice it's unless you click on it, you don't see it. And I can still type on this. This is supposed to be an output box, meaning it's just supposed to display things. The user shouldn't be able to type in there. So we're going to take a couple more name parameters here that are kind of fun to use. So we're going to set the state, and the state is disabled. What that means is that when the user can't type in there, so the text box will appear, but you can't do anything with it. If you want to make state where the user can type in it, the state would be normal. You might be at this point saying, oh my gosh, there's so many different things to remember. And, you know, as you do this, you'll start noticing patterns. Don't worry about memorizing this stuff. Just get good at looking it up online and asking your friends and getting help. You'll pick it up pretty quick. The next thing I like to do is I like to do the border width. So I like to give a border, and I'm going to give it a border width of 2. And then there's this nice one you can add, which is called a relief. And I'm going to give it a relief called a groove relief. I think it looks nicer. So let's save this. Let's give it a whirl. And there you can see like kind of the box there. And notice I can't click in it now. I'm clicking, doesn't work. Looking pretty good. I just had to add 2 more widgets. I just have to add my button and my checkbox. So let's do that and wrap this up. So I'm going to come down here, hit enter a couple times, let's get some white space. So if I'm going to say btn run, which stands for button run, equals tk dot, and there's a constructor called button. I'm going to pass it root, and I'm going to add a couple more things in the constructor. I'm going to say text equals calculate. That's how we know what goes on the button. And I'm going to say highlight, this is a long one, background equal, and now I'm going to pass it what's called a hexadecimal code. So this is this is going to set the highlight background color essentially, and colors are passed using hexadecimal codes. So hexadecimal is a numbering system that has 0 through 9 and then A, B, C, D, E, F. You've probably seen it before, and it's really worthwhile taking some time to understand it. I do have some videos on here about this as well. So I'm going to pass it 3E, E, 4149. So this is a specific color. I'm going to give this a save. Oh, what haven't I done? Oh, I have to say btn.config, and I'm going to set the foreground equal to blue, and I'm going to say btn, oh, it should be btn run.config, btn run.pack, and I'm going to fill equals tk.both. Let's save this. Let's take a look, see what we get. Oh, you're still with me. Good on you for staying for so long. And there you go. We get a button with a gray background and a blue light up. Just so you know, coloring buttons is really a pain with Macs. It just is. So don't get too caught up spending hours trying to fix this. There's a weird thing around TK Enter in Macs. Remember, we're building a prototype. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't get too caught up with that. Make sure you ask for help if you're having trouble, because nothing's worse than spending a couple hours trying to figure out the coloring of buttons only to realize you're not going to get it to work. Okay, let's add our checkbox. So I'm going to make a check variable equals tk.check button. This is a check button. I'm going to say root, and I'm going to say text equals high contrast. Eventually we'll give this a high contrast mode, and I'm going to say check.config, and I'm going to anchor it, because I want to anchor it to the west, tk.w, and I'm going to say check.pack, fill equals tk.both. Alright, I think we're there. I think we have our working front end now. So let's give this a save. Oh, let's close the old version. If you're still with us, good on you. And there we go. There's this beautiful front end that allows me to input a radius and a height. Hit calculate and nothing happens. And that's what we're going to address in our next video. In our next video, you can turn this check on and off. In our next video, we're going to kind of get this to actually calculate. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Have a wonderful day.